The source of the Nile was legendary for any number of peoples over the course of time because it was enormously important to them. It fed their civilizations, made life possible, and at the same time, no one really knew where it originated. Right? So, for the Romans, for the Greeks, for the Egyptians themselves, this was a question that generated a great deal of curiosity. It also certainly generated legends, speculation. You have Herodotus who's suggesting that the Nile originates in the Atlas Mountains, that it crosses the Sahara Desert, comes from the west, and then sort of turns northward. You have Ptolemy who's speculating that there are these great, what he calls mountains of the moon, that sort of provide the snow melt that originates as the source of the Nile. There's an enormous amount of speculation. Now, there are other people, of course, who know where the source of the Nile is because they live there. But the point is that for them, that knowledge isn't relevant to the people who are thousands of miles downstream. So whenever we talk about a question like exploration or the origins of something, obviously we have to frame it in terms of the particular groups of people that we're talking about. And it means different things in different contexts for different people. For Europeans, the exploration of the Nile is probably the biggest goal in abstract terms that drives their enterprise in the 19th century, because it's seen as the largest and the most important river, and also because there is this long heritage or history associated with it. I mean, Europeans have classical educations. They know about Herodotus, they know about Ptolemy, they know about the ancient curiosity about the source of the Nile. So to actually sort of claim we've found the source brings with it a kind of prestige and status that really is much greater than probably any other sort of geographical discovery that anyone could make in Africa at that time, because of that heritage and that background. Anyone trying to discover the source of the Nile, tracing its full extent, is going to come across any number of obstacles. I mean, there are political, human obstacles. Over the course of thousands of miles, you have different groups of people, polities, interests that will have their reasons to be suspicious of strangers coming through their territory and might want to sort of prohibit their entry. So that's one of the obstacles or challenges that anyone exploring the Nile is going to face. But there are obviously also a variety of natural challenges. The easiest way to explore the Nile is by boat, naturally, but by the same token, there are a series of cataracts that prevent movement at certain points up the Nile. Then there is the Sud, this great swampy region which is clogged with vegetation, which is virtually impassable by boat. There are disease constraints. So there are any number of natural and human obstacles that make this an extraordinarily arduous challenge. I mean, not just for the ancients, not just for the Victorians, but for anyone, in fact, trying to do so today. Anytime we're trying to sort of talk about sort of who knows how much about the Nile, it depends upon what group of people we're talking about and where they're originally located. So most of the discussion about sort of discovering the sources of the Nile originates with those people that are in the Mediterranean basin. So the Egyptians themselves, first and foremost, who managed to make their way up to sort of, I think, about the third cataract. At least they established a military base there and may have gone further. It's also important to keep in mind, of course, there are civilizations further up the Nile than that. There's the civilization of Kush. We have no idea, in fact, sort of what it knew about the further extent of the White and the Blue Nile. But in any case, speaking again about these people in the Mediterranean basin, and you have the Greeks. We know that the Greeks were extraordinarily curious about the origins of the Nile. We have Herodotus and other authorities who talk about this. Not quite sure sort of if I doubt that there are any specific expeditions carried out by the Greeks to trace the source of the Nile. The Romans, however, who at a point ruled Egypt, had an incentive and had the means to do so, and they evidently made their way up to about the Sud on the White Nile. Now we're talking, we also need to distinguish between the White and the Blue Nile, all right? And the Blue Nile is not as long, but in fact it provides the primary source of water, and 90% of the volume of the Nile River downstream comes from the Blue Nile. More easily traced, plus there are these series of Ethiopian civilizations that spring up there that probably had a variety of contacts with parts of the Mediterranean world over time. So part of the problem here, talking about ancient knowledge in this enterprise, is that much of this knowledge may have been, in fact, word of mouth. Some of it may have been written down and simply hasn't survived. We don't really know fully sort of what was known by much of that Mediterranean world about the Nile and portions of it and how far they could get, and so on. The Arabs and to some degree Indian traders had long had contact along the East African coast and of course up the Nile in various capacities. But it's really not until about the 1840s that you begin to see Arab traders, facilitated by Indians as well, make penetration into the lake region of East Africa, which we can generally identify as the source of the White Nile. So it comes before Europeans make any effort to arrive there. And in fact, these Arab and Indian traders facilitate European exploration. So in that sense, one can argue that they're certainly there and bring with them knowledge which is communicated, in fact, back to Europeans about the interior that helps to stimulate greater interest in the region. It's the Arabs, the Arab traders, for example, who begin first to report that there are great lakes or a great lake in the interior of East Africa. And this generates an enormous amount of speculation among Europeans about the nature of this lake or lakes. There's a famous map that's produced which shows this enormous lake, a European map, this enormous lake in the center of East Africa. It's described as a giant slug in terms of its shape, right? And so one of the initial impetuses for European entry into East Africa from the coast, from Zanzibar actually, is as much to sort of determine the nature of this lake region as it is to sort of identify the source of the Nile itself. Arab and Indian traders are in East Africa mainly for trade in ivory and in slaves. These are the two primary products that are being exported from the interior, and it's a trade that really takes off in the 1830s, 1840s. Once the Sultan of Oman transfers his capital actually from Oman to Zanzibar. There's no particular interest on the part of these traders to identify the source of the Nile per se, but they are interested in the natural geography insofar as it facilitates their operations, and they bring back reports of that interior information. Should also add there are also Arab traders that are pushing up from Egypt, and this is another primary impetus for further exploration. After Muhammad Ali establishes a quasi-independent Egyptian state, after Muhammad Ali establishes a quasi-independent Egyptian state, breaking away from the Ottoman Empire, he launches a westernizing enterprise, a modernizing enterprise for the Egyptian state that also entails imperial expansion in a variety of different directions. But one of those is movement up the Nile Valley. And he, in fact, initiates a number of expeditions himself that push Egyptian power and influence up the Nile. and begin to send traders, again, for ivory and slaves, up toward the lake region. So what you have by the 1840s, 1850s is two Muslim states, Egypt and Zanzibar, which both are expansionist, enterprising, commercial, and see opportunities, trading opportunities in the interior, in a region that effectively is the source of the Nile. So from two different directions, you have this almost a pincer movement by Arab traders that actually sort of opens avenues or gateways that are then taken up by European explorers. European interest in the source of the Nile and their efforts to, in fact, identify that source are stimulated in large measure by what the Egyptians and the Zanzibaris do. Because many of those traders, their reports circulate back not just to the Arab world and the Indian world, but to the European world as well. So you have some so-called armchair historians back in Britain who are interviewing, in fact, traders, Arab traders, and gaining information about what's there in the interior. And they're drawing speculative maps that are the product of this. You also start to see Christian missionaries begin to enter the East African coast. Initially, a couple of German missionaries who make expeditions into the interior and bring back reports of mountains that have snow-capped peaks. And this causes a huge stir, precisely because it seems to confirm the claims of Ptolemy that there are these mountains of the moon that are the original sources. And then you have the Royal Geographical Society, which is founded in 1830. Which is this curious entity. It's a scientific society, but it's also very closely affiliated, associated with the British government and its imperial interests. It's driven too by economic concerns. I'm curious about sort of what potential mineral resources, plant resources, and the like exist in various territories. And it also is a society that its own financial health is dependent upon its membership. So the more it can grow its membership, the better off it's going to be. For all of these reasons, exploration of East Africa, identifying the source of the Nile, provides a perfect vehicle for pulling together these interest groups and, strengthening actually the Royal Geographical Society itself. So the Royal Geographical Society sees the Nile, the source of the Nile, as an ideal vehicle, in a way, for stimulating interest among the British public in geographical questions, furthering British economic and political interests, and advancing the society's own status and influence. The first concerted scientific effort by the British to explore the Nile is initiated in 1857, sponsored by the Royal Geographical Society as well as the British government. And it's an expedition that is led by Richard Burton, and his companion in this enterprise is John Speke. And they arrive in Zanzibar, make preparations, and enter the interior in 1857. Something I think that's often lost sight of when we talk about British exploration of this region or any region in Africa, or most any region, is the degree to which these expeditions rely upon pre-existing networks of trade and pre-existing knowledge. And in this case, the knowledge that had been established by Zanzibari Arab traders. So when this expedition is launched, it's almost a co-British Zanzibari expedition. The expedition leader, that is to say the man who sort of organizes the caravan and is the principal guide, is appointed by the Sultan of Zanzibar. the expedition actually carries a Zanzibari flag. The expedition carries letters of credit and introduction by the Sultan of Zanzibar, so that Burton and Speke will be given assistance by the traders in the interior. And there are several key trading posts in the interior that are absolutely essential to their survival. The whole nature of this expedition, the structure and character of the caravan, is really virtually like the structure and character of the trading caravans that are moving in and out of the interior among Arabs. So, in some sense, one can argue that Burton and Speke are almost simply the partners or even passengers on an enterprise that is really driven and supported by Arabs and the Zanzibar government. Why would the Zanzibaris have any interest in supporting a European expedition into the interior of East Africa when we know what the consequences, long-term consequences of that were? First of all, Zanzibar itself is quite a cosmopolitan state. It in fact draws upon expertise from a variety of different groups. For example, a lot of the financing for the Zanzibari state comes from Indians, and the head of the Zanzibari financial operations is in fact an Indian. A lot of the financing for the trade into the interior is Indian. Moreover, Zanzibar itself doesn't have anything to offer to Africans in the interior in return for ivory and slaves. I mean, they don't simply steal this stuff. Well, to some degree they capture slaves, but a lot of this is actually trade that's going on. So the question is then, what kind of goods can they offer Africans in the interior in return for this? Well, the principal set of goods that draw interest from Africans in the interior are textiles. Particularly, ironically, American cotton textile goods, right? And also various kinds of iron products, pots, pans, guns, things of that sort. So from the perspective of the Zanzibari state, it's really in their interest to generate the attention and support of any number of partners in this enterprise, because it facilitates their trading interests. So if they can get the British involved as well, first of all, especially if they open up new potential markets in the interior, go to places where traders haven't already arrived, that opens up new trading opportunities. If they can get the British involved as traders in this enterprise more generally by providing products that the Zanzibaris can serve as middlemen for to the interior, again, that works in their interest. I don't think the Zanzibaris could have even imagined that there was a potential, certainly in the 1850s, 1860s, for the British or any other Europeans to replace them as the figures in this trade. So they see themselves, I think, really as being in the driver's seat. And from that perspective, an expedition by these two Englishmen, who in many respects are the helpless sort of partners in this enterprise, is fine. I think we can see explorers in the long view as the avatars of European colonialism. I don't think there's any question about that. These are enterprises that are driven not just by geographical curiosity, but they're also driven by economic and political interests. Europeans want to know what's in the interior of Africa that can bring some kind of profit and advantage to them. They also want to gain knowledge about roots and peoples and various other things that may be of benefit or value if, in fact, they come to acquire greater political influence in the region, which of course they do with the scramble for Africa. That eventually happens. So we can see it in that regard, but I think it's a mistake to regard the explorers themselves as imperialists in any obvious or transparent sense. And in this respect, they really don't have any power, all right? They really don't have any power. People like Speke and Burton and Grant and the rest of them they are very much dependent upon the indigenous peoples that they come into contact with, upon the Arab and other traders with which they're in association, and their position is in many respects a fairly helpless one. So we can see them as important in sort of opening the door for further European interest in the region, but not actually sort of laying any kind of formal claims.